You'd think a man would notice his life falling apart before it actually hits him in the face. But there I was, blindsided. It wasn't a slow unraveling or a string of small doubts. It hit me all at once, like a sudden downpour when the skies were clear just moments before. 1 minute, I was planning to grill steaks for dinner, and the next, I was staring at her phone, reading messages that changed everything. We had what people would call a comfortable marriage. Not perfect, whose is? But stable. Or so I thought. I worked a steady job. She had her routines. Weekends were for lazy mornings and errands. There wasn't any grand romance left, but I thought we were in it for the long haul. It's strange how you can convince yourself of something just because it's easier than asking hard questions. The signs were there, though, if I'm being honest. They started small, almost imperceptible. She'd head out for errands dressed in ways that didn't make sense. Skirts with no underwear, for one. At first, I chalked it up to her newfound confidence or a phase of wanting to feel sexy again. I even complimented her. "You look great today," I'd say, and she'd smile like I'd said something profound. But there was a change in her demeanor, too. A quiet tension, like she was balancing something fragile that could shatter if I looked too closely. I brushed it off because that's what you do when you don't want to admit things might not be as solid as you thought. Then came the excuses. She'd leave her phone in other rooms or laugh too hard at text messages, brushing off my questions with, "Oh, it's just a group chat." Her laughter felt distant, like it wasn't meant for me anymore. It wasn't until she mentioned a last-minute weekend trip that the knot in my stomach tightened. A yoga retreat, she'd called it, out in the Midwest. "A friend told me about it," she'd said casually, avoiding my eyes. "It's a good way to decompress. You know how stressed I've been." I nodded like an idiot, not wanting to be the guy who questions his wife's need for self-care. But something didn't sit right. Her story had gaps. No itinerary. No specific location. Just vague answers and a smile that felt plastered on. That night, I lay in bed next to her, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was overthinking. Paranoia wasn't new to me. I'd been burned before, and the scars made me cautious. But this was different. This wasn't the kind of unease that comes from insecurity. It was the kind that comes from knowing, deep down, that you're being lied to. The next day, I got my answer. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she was upstairs. I glanced at the screen, and the preview froze me in place. "Mark, can't wait to see you this weekend. I'll make it worth the wait." I don't know how long I stared at that message, but time seemed to freeze. My body felt detached, like it was on autopilot, while my brain screamed, "This is it. You can't ignore this anymore." I unlocked the phone. Don't ask me how I knew the passcode. You just pick up these things in a marriage. Her home screen was neat and orderly, apps aligned in rows that hinted at a life far more composed than the one she was living. I wasn't interested in emails or photos. I went straight to the messages. The thread with Mark was long weeks of exchanges that peeled away the mask she'd been wearing. It wasn't just casual chatting. It was far too intimate for that. Inside jokes, pet names, shared fantasies. This wasn't new. This was a pattern. They'd been building this connection for months, maybe longer. They weren't just talking, either. They were planning. The messages detailed times they'd stolen to be together and, more chillingly, how she'd managed to hide it from me. Her excuse about helping a friend pack for a move? A lie. The late-night grocery runs? Another lie. She even joked about it in the messages. "He doesn't suspect a thing," she'd written, followed by a laughing emoji. My chest tightened as I scrolled. Not because I was in shock. I wasn't. I think part of me had known for a while. What hit me the hardest was the ease with which she lied, the way she'd woven deceit into our daily lives without so much as a second thought. By the time she came downstairs, still in her bathrobe, I was sitting at the kitchen table with her phone lying in front of me. She was humming to herself, carrying a mug of coffee like it was just another ordinary morning. When she saw me, though, her steps faltered. She froze, her smile dropping. I didn't let her recover. Who's Mark? I asked, my voice steady and direct. Her face went blank, like her brain was trying to reboot. Then she forced a confused smile, playing for time. What are you talking about? I gestured to the phone. I'm talking about this, I said, keeping my tone calm but firm. The messages. The ones where you're joking about how clueless I am while you sneak off to meet him. So, again, who's Mark? Her eyes darted to the phone, then back to me. I saw the moment her defenses crumbled, the flicker of fear in her expression. She opened her mouth as if to protest, but closed it again when she realized I wasn't going to let this go. I'm waiting, I said, leaning back in my chair. You might want to start talking before I fill in the blanks myself. She sighed, sinking into the chair across from me like the weight of the world had finally caught up to her. Okay, she said quietly. Let me explain. Explain what? I snapped, my voice colder now. That you've been lying to me for months? That your late-night errands were just excuses to be with him? That you thought I wouldn't notice? What exactly do you think you can explain? It's not what you think, she said, her voice trembling. We didn't. It's not like that. Then tell me what it's like, I said, folding my arms across my chest. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like what I think it is. Her hands twisted in her lap, her voice dropping to a whisper. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I felt so alone. Alone. I repeated, my tone sharp. You felt alone. We live in the same house, share the same bed, eat at the same table. And instead of talking to me, you decided to run to someone else. It wasn't like that, she said, her voice breaking. It started as just talking. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Oh, so it's an accident now? I shot back. You accidentally texted him, accidentally made plans, accidentally lied to my face? She flinched, and for a moment, her eyes filled with tears. But I wasn't going to let her tears wash this away. How long? I asked, my voice like steel. How long has this been going on? Her gaze dropped to the table, her lips trembling. A few months, she finally admitted. A few months, I repeated, my tone flat. And in all that time, it never occurred to you to stop. To come clean. To try to fix whatever was wrong instead of blowing up our marriage. I didn't know how, she said, barely audible. I was scared. Scared of what? I demanded. That I'd find out. That I'd hold you accountable? Or that you'd have to admit you're not the person you pretend to be. She didn't respond, just wiped at her face with trembling hands. I don't know, she finally whispered. I don't know why I let it go this far. I leaned forward, locking my eyes on hers. Here's what I do know, I said, my voice unwavering. You've shattered my trust. You've lied, cheated, and made a fool out of me. I don't care how scared or lonely or whatever you claim to have been. None of that justifies this. Her tears fell harder, but she didn't argue. She didn't even try to defend herself. She just sat there, staring at the phone like it was a grenade she'd accidentally armed. Maybe it was. I wasn't done. Leaving her in silence or letting her stew in guilt wasn't enough. I needed to hear it all, every sordid detail, every excuse she had been rehearsing in her head, every justification she thought would make this seem less despicable. If I was going to end this marriage, I wanted to know exactly what I was walking away from. Look at me, I said, my voice steady and commanding. We're not moving past this until you tell me the truth. All of it. No dodging, no half-truths, no I don't knows. You owe me that much. She finally lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen, her face pale. What do you want me to say? She asked weakly. I want you to start from the beginning, I said. How long has this been going on? How did it start? And why the hell did you think it was okay? She hesitated, her hands gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. We started talking a few months ago, she said slowly. He messaged me on social media. It was innocent at first, Just catching up. We used to know each other before. Before you and I met. Innocent. I scoffed. So you're saying you just happened to reconnect with an old flame, and it just accidentally turned into this? Her face flushed, and she looked down at her lap. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't mean for it to happen. Stop saying that, I snapped, my patience wearing thin. It didn't just happen. You made choices. You chose to text him, to keep talking, to plan this weekend. At what point did you decide that lying to your husband was worth whatever you were getting out of this? She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I wasn't holding back, not after everything she had done. I don't know, she whispered. I felt so disconnected from you. You were always working, always distracted, and I felt like I was invisible. Mark. He listened. He made me feel seen. Seen. I repeated, incredulous. You mean he fed you lines about how wonderful and misunderstood you are while knowing full well you're married? That's not being seen. That's being manipulated. Or worse, complicit. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But then she deflated, shaking her head. You're right, she said quietly. I let it happen because I wanted to feel something. Anything. Besides the emptiness I've been feeling. Emptiness, I said flatly. So instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix whatever was wrong, you went to him. And now, you're sitting here expecting me to believe this is my fault. I'm not blaming you, she said, her voice rising. I know I screwed up, okay? I know I hurt you. I didn't know how to tell you how I was feeling without it turning into a fight. Then let me make it simple for you, I said, my voice cold. You've destroyed this marriage. There's no coming back from this. You don't get to cry and apologize and expect me to sweep this under the rug. Her eyes widened, and tears started streaming down her face. Please, she said, her voice cracking. Don't say that. We can fix this. We can go to therapy, work through it. Whatever it takes. Therapy. I laughed bitterly. Therapy only works when both people are honest and committed. You've proven you're neither. You didn't even give me the chance to help you because you didn't want help. You wanted an escape. She shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to get this far. Stop saying that. I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. Stop acting like this was some accident, like you tripped and fell into an affair. You knew exactly what you were doing. You planned it, you lied, and now you're sitting here, playing the victim. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let her tears soften me, not this time. I'm done, I said firmly, standing up. This marriage is over. You've made your choices, and now you'll live with the consequences. She froze, her sobs cutting off as she stared at me in shock. No, she whispered. Please. Don't do this. I love you. Love. I scoffed. Don't insult me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. Love isn't just words, it's actions. And your actions have made it crystal clear where your priorities are. I walked out of the kitchen, heading straight for the bedroom. I grabbed a suitcase and started packing. My movements were deliberate, methodical, like I was on autopilot. She didn't follow me, didn't try to stop me. Maybe she knew it was pointless. When I came back out, suitcase in hand, she was still sitting at the table, staring at her phone with a vacant expression. She looked up as I walked past her, but I didn't stop. I'll send someone to get the rest of my things, I said without looking at her. Don't bother calling me. We're done. She didn't say anything, and I didn't wait for her to. I walked out the door, into the cold night, and didn't look back. The air outside hit me like a slap. Cold, sharp, and unrelenting. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty street, suitcase in hand, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over me. I had walked out of my house, my marriage, my life as I knew it. And yet, I wasn't sure if I felt relief, anger, or just hollowed-out exhaustion. I tossed the suitcase into the trunk of my car, got in, and drove without a destination. The streets were mostly deserted, the glow of streetlights casting long, lonely shadows. I drove aimlessly, letting the silence of the car wrap around me like a cocoon. I didn't turn on the radio or check my phone. I just drove, replaying everything in my head. Her excuses, her tears, her pleas for forgiveness, they echoed in my mind, over and over. I had always wondered how I'd react if I ever found myself in a situation like this. Would I rage? Would I cry? Would I beg for answers? But now that it had happened, I felt none of those things. It was like my emotions had been stripped away, leaving only a cold, quiet clarity. I pulled into an empty parking lot and killed the engine. Sitting there in the stillness, I let myself breathe for what felt like the first time all night. The enormity of what had just unfolded started to sink in. This wasn't just a fight we could work through. This wasn't something that could be patched up with apologies and promises. This was the end. And as much as it hurt, I knew it was the right decision. It's strange, the way your mind works in moments like this. Flashes of memories started playing in my head. The day we met, our wedding, lazy Sunday morning spent laughing over coffee. All those moments that felt so real, so solid, now felt like they belonged to someone else's life. They didn't fit with the person she had become, or maybe the person she always was. And then there were the little things that I couldn't stop thinking about. The night she came home late, the time she dismissed my questions with a laugh, the way she stopped wearing underwear when she went out. Those signs I had ignored, brushed off, convinced myself were harmless. I felt a pang of anger, not just at her, but at myself. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let this happen? But as the anger rose, it was quickly swallowed by something else. Grief. I wasn't just mourning her betrayal. I was mourning the life we were supposed to have, the future we had planned, the trust one had placed in her. It felt like losing a part of myself, a part one wasn't sure I'd ever get back. I don't know how long I sat there in that parking lot, staring at nothing. Time seemed irrelevant. I just needed to sit with the weight of it all, to let myself feel the pain and the loss before I could even think about what came next. Eventually, I pulled out my phone and called a friend, a guy I had known since college, someone I trusted. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy but concerned when he heard mine. "Hey man, you okay?" he asked. "No," I said bluntly. "I need a place to crash." Without hesitation, he said, "Come over. I'll leave the door unlocked." When I arrived at his apartment, he was waiting for me with a beer in hand and a look that said he already knew something bad had happened. I didn't give him the full story, just enough to explain why I was standing there with a suitcase and a shattered heart. "You did the right thing," he said after I finished. "Walking away takes guts. It's easier to stay and try to fix something broken, but sometimes the only way to really move forward is to let go." His words stuck with me. For years, I had told myself that staying, fighting, working through things, was what made a marriage strong. But now, I realized that staying wasn't always the answer. Sometimes, walking away was the only way to protect yourself from further damage. That night, as I lay on his lumpy couch staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this define me. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it felt like my world had been turned upside down. But I wasn't going to let her betrayal break me. I had been through heartbreak before, and I had survived. This time would be no different. Tomorrow, I would call a lawyer. I would sort through the mess she had made and take the steps to move on with my life. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But I would get there. I would rebuild. And one day, I would look back on this moment not as the end of something, but as the beginning of something new. The morning after felt like waking up in a world I didn't recognize. The sun streamed through the blinds of my friend's apartment, but it didn't bring warmth, just a stark reminder that nothing was the same. I stared at the ceiling for a while, letting the reality sink in. My marriage was over. There was no more debating, No room for reconciliation. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. I spent the first hour making phone calls. The lawyer I contacted came highly recommended by another friend, someone who'd gone through a messy divorce a year ago. Get it done quickly, he'd advised me. The longer you drag it out, the harder it gets. So, I followed his lead. The lawyer's calm, methodical tone was a strange comfort. He laid out the steps, separating finances, documenting the assets, and initiating the paperwork. It was clinical, cold even, but it was what I needed. Action, not emotion. Next, I arranged to have the rest of my belongings picked up from the house. I wasn't going back there, not even for closure. Closure wasn't something you found in the same place you lost it. I texted her briefly, letting her know someone would be by to collect my things. She responded almost immediately with a simple, "Okay." No apology, no plea. Just one word that felt like the final nail in the coffin. The rest of the day was a blur of logistics. Opening a new bank account, updating my address, looking for an apartment. Each task was a step away from the life I had built with her and toward the one I would now build on my own. It was exhausting, but it was also oddly liberating. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking control of my life. Emotionally, though, I was still a wreck. There were moments when the sadness hit me like a tidal wave. Memories of our wedding, the way she used to laugh at my stupid jokes, the nights we stayed up late talking about our dreams. Those memories felt like a cruel joke now, a reminder of what I thought we had but never truly did. And then there was the anger. It wasn't the explosive kind, it was quieter, simmering beneath the surface. Anger at her for betraying me, anger at myself for not seeing the signs sooner, and anger at the universe for putting me through this in the first place. But even that anger began to fade, replaced by something else: acceptance. Acceptance that what happened was beyond my control. Acceptance that no amount of love or effort on my part could have changed who she was or the choices she made. Acceptance that it wasn't my fault. By the end of the week, I had signed the divorce papers and found a small apartment across town. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom place with outdated fixtures and a view of the parking lot. But it was mine. A fresh start. I spent the first night there sitting on the floor with a takeout pizza, staring at the bare walls and thinking about everything I'd learned from this experience. Trust, I realized, isn't just about believing someone won't betray you. It's about feeling secure enough to share your fears, your insecurities, your truths. It's about being willing to face the uncomfortable conversations instead of avoiding them. And love, as much as people romanticize it, isn't enough on its own. Love without honesty, effort, and respect is just an illusion. I also learned something about myself, that I'm stronger than I thought. Walking away from her wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And that decision, as painful as it was, showed me that I valued myself enough to demand better. To demand honesty. To demand respect. Looking forward, I don't know what the future holds. The thought of dating again, of putting my heart on the line, feels daunting right now. But I know I'll get there. I know I'll heal, and when I do, I'll be ready for something real. Something built on a foundation that can't be so easily shattered. For now, I'm focusing on rebuilding my life, my confidence, and my sense of self. It's going to take time, but I'm okay with that. This isn't the end of my story. It's just a new chapter, one I get to write for myself. Do you think I could have solved everything in a different way, or is divorce the only option in this case? Let me know in the comments below this video.